Good morning. Are we still enjoying the fact that we made it through the queue? If I could have everyone's attention now. This is me, Susan Scott Parker. I'm a strategic advisor to the ILO's Global Business and Disability Network, and I'm just about to start this panel session, which I think we're going to find very interesting. If I could, thank you very much, everybody. And so, welcome to this extraordinarily important session of the UK Forum on Business and Human Rights, where we're talking, of course, about disability as a fundamental human rights economic imperative. The theme, exploring reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities, accommodations which, of course, benefit disabled people in the workforce, but also outside. But I think you'll find that much of our conversation today is focused on economic empowerment. I wanted to stress that our discussion today is focused on where the needs of business and the aspirations of people with disabilities coincide, where the obligation to adjust how things are done so that it becomes easier for people to do their jobs at work on an equal basis actually enhances productivity, engagement, and in our world we would say everyone wins a balloon. I don't know if at the United Nations I'm allowed to say everybody wins a balloon. But that's very much our theme today. I am going to read the technical definition of reasonable accommodations from the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that I trust many of you are very familiar with. Reasonable accommodations means necessary and appropriate modification and adjustments, not imposing an undue burden where needed in a particular case. Hear the word about a particular individual case, to ensure persons with disabilities have the enjoyment or exercise on an equal basis with others of all their human rights and fundamental freedoms. In other words, we're talking about where accessibility, while hugely important, being barrier-free for groups of persons with disabilities, is not enough. Disability equality happens when we have the obligation to remove barriers for groups combines with enabling individuals to access the tools and flexibility that they require in order to compete and then actually contribute on an equal basis. For example, we see where someone who stutters, while they may be able to get into a video interview for a job, because there's no accommodation for an individual who stutters and takes an extra 15 seconds over the 3-minute limit, is automatically disqualified for consideration. There are thousands of examples of the kinds of adjustments to policies, procedures, technology, the built environment, even what I call the first adjustment, which is to the brain, that allows people with disabilities to prove they have the capability to contribute. We don't have time for that today. I want to take a moment now to introduce our distinguished panel. And then what we'll proceed to do is we'll hear from the panel, and then I'm optimistic that we'll have a good 20 or 30 minutes for questions from the audience. So our panel, we have Irénée Thurin, who's chair of the Working Group on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities for the European Network of National Human Rights Institutions. We have Patience Lapolice, who's the HR director for Casamance, who's here as a founding member of the recently established Business and Disability Network in Shanghai. Shanghai. She's actually from Senegal. You may wonder where I found Shanghai. It starts with an S. So she's from Senegal. And that new network in Senegal is a very valued part of the ILO's Global Business and Disability Network, global community of national business and disability networks. We have Danielle Concha-Cambola, National Director of the National Service for Persons with Disabilities in Chile. We have Joanna Neto, Global Vice President, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion from Sodexo, the global firm. And we have Rina Prasaravini, who is the Second Vice President, Advocacy and Awareness Raising of the Indonesian Association of Women with Disabilities. Really glad you could be here today. Glad you made it through the queue. And what I'd like to do now is to open with Irenye. I've asked you to sort of set reasonable adjustments in context as a human right, in terms of the work of human rights institutions that you know so well. How are they helping society more widely, as well as business, to meet their obligations in ways which also benefit the economy?
Thank you, Susan, and good morning, everyone. I'm honored to be here with you today and to start the discussion on this important topic. So reasonable accommodations are not optional extras or acts of charities. They are legal obligations that promote dignity, equality, and exclusion. Importantly, their denial constitutes discrimination. Businesses must provide these accommodations unless they impose a disproportionate burden, which must be assessed in individual situations. Reasonable accommodations are linked to the obligation to ensure accessibility, which is intended to be proactive and systemic, aimed to remove barriers for everyone by creating inclusive environments. While reasonable accommodations are reactive and tailored to address barriers faced by specific individuals in particular situations when general accessibility measures are insufficient or not implemented. State actors have a critical responsibility in ensuring this. They must establish clear legal frameworks to enforce compliance. They must offer guidance to businesses and ensure effective monitoring mechanisms. National human rights institutions, as independent bodies established to promote and protect human rights within a country, also play an important role in ensuring that the right to reasonable accommodation is implemented. We handle complaints regarding cases where accommodations have been denied or discriminatory practices persist. We monitor compliance with human rights standards, working to identify systemic gaps and provide recommendations to governments, to businesses, to help them fulfill their obligations under the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, including regarding reasonable accommodation. At the same time, and even more so, we advocate for systemic accessibility improvements, ensuring inclusive workplaces, public spaces, in public institutions and services such as schools, healthcare, courts, polling stations, transport, and digital environments. Through raising awareness, national human rights institutions help governments and businesses understand the legal responsibilities and the importance of inclusive environments. To name just one example, Germany's National Human Rights Institution recently published guidelines on employment rights, including an analysis of General Comment number 8 on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, highlighting the right to work. These guidelines addressed gaps in awareness of workplace accessibilities and the lack of inclusive hiring practices. And I'm sure in the future we could explore new opportunities to strengthen collaboration between national human rights institutions and the business sector to ensure improved implementation of the rights of persons with disabilities.
Thank you very much. I think for us, the insight that it is a legal obligation, but one which is best addressed through best practice is really important. And so we've been looking at best practice in terms of removing the obstacles disabled individuals encounter created by artificial intelligence, particularly as it's used by human resources. Can you give us some insight into the kinds of adjustments, Irenye, that you think employers should be looking at with those technologies?
Thank you, Susan, for this important question. Artificial intelligence is transforming workplaces. And while it offers incredible opportunities, it also presents serious challenges, especially for persons with disabilities. One major issue is bias. AI system often relies on historical data, and unfortunately, that data rarely includes persons with disabilities in a meaningful way. This can lead to algorithms that screen out candidates with employment gaps or non-standard career paths. And because these systems often operate as so-called black box, it's hard for job seekers to understand and challenge decisions that feel unfair. Accessibility is another challenge. Many AI-driven recruitment platforms such as chatbots and assessment tools don't work well with assistive technologies such as screen readers, which are used by individuals with visual impairments. But AI also has the potential to transform recruitment into a fairer, more accessible process by enabling personalized accommodations like speech-to-text tools or simplified interfaces for neurodiverse candidates. And with bias-free data sets, it can reduce discrimination by minimizing the influence of human prejudice. AI also have the power to make workplaces more inclusive for everyone. For example, AI-powered tools can provide live captions for meetings and translate text into easier-to-read formats. They can also help employees with mobility impairments navigate large office spaces. AI can also help employers monitor inclusion by identifying patterns like unequal access to promotions. But to achieve better workplace inclusivity through AI, businesses need to make sure that AI they use are fair, accessible, and transparent. And this includes collaborating with persons with disabilities and their representative organizations to understand and meet real needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I could move on now to, yes, Senegal, not Shanghai. Patience, could you tell us a bit about what you've learned as you're coming together with fellow companies in Senegal to create a business disability network?
Merci, Suzanne.
Thank you, Suzanne, and good morning to everyone else. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the question. What's interesting in our case here is that our Senegal network was created based on a project. That project was launched by the NGO Sightsavers. It was implemented by the Senegalese Federation for persons with disabilities. It's a project that looks at the autonomy of persons with disabilities, and we work to make resources available, human resources, in order to provide mentorship for young persons with disabilities, either to help them find jobs or to help them create businesses. It is thus that all of the businesses that have participated have been brought up to speed on reasonable accommodation and inclusion in general. And the countries, rather the companies have been interested for that, knowing that, and have participated in the network for this reason. So the first thing we do is to help companies understand what this means. In the mentorship and the workshops, what we do is link performance with the making available of reasonable accommodations, specific reasonable accommodations with their specific needs. For us, in particular, DRH, the importance of well-being in the workplace is something we address every day. We look at this as an overall matter, well-being globally, so that all employees can have a work environment that allows for them to be performant. Facing the realities in our network over time, we have discovered that it is also important and meaningful to fine-tune the analysis and really work to address the specific needs of our partners. That is to say, to have a balance between individual performance that allows us to address every partner involved. Each individual needs to have a specific response to their needs individually, and to address the global performance of the company. So that's the balance. And what's interesting is to help companies to understand that the responses that we provide to specific needs of individuals allow for globally improved performance for the company. So we go from we help them move from looking at the reasonable accommodations as an extra burden to actually investment in greater performance. So they invest in individuals, and that ensures the global performance of the company. So we linked the reasonable accommodations to performance.
It's about how the aim is to give everyone the tools and flexibility and accessibility they require, which of course means given 25% of the workforce of any large organization will have a disability and or a health condition, you need a particular mindset and expertise to make sure disability-specific obstacles have also been addressed. And so, in that context, then, patients, how is your organization with something like 1,000 employees? How are you addressing this as an employer in your own right?
Merci.
Thank you, Susan, for the question. Personally, in our company, in our organization, we've been in contact with, we've noticed that when companies contact the network, it's important to address the questions of all stakeholders. We've noted that there are individuals that have not had their specific needs addressed. So there might be a procurement individual working, and their performance has been judged to be middling or average, and then it was determined that they have a visual disability, and all that was necessary was to give them a specific screen that allowed them to see their screen better. And in providing that larger screen for the individual with the visual impairment allows them to perform at a higher level. Their performance is multiplied by twofold, really. They meet their objectives. They're more comfortable in their workplace. And that, of course, allows us to understand that the specific response to that individual puts the person in a position to succeed. Now, the second example that I would offer is a very specific case. We have an intern with a mental disability. And in Senegal, this is an obstacle to having a job. Legally, the individual is not in a position to be put under contract for a job. But what we have understood is that individual wanted to participate in the life of the company, and that individual actually chose where they wanted to work and with whom they wanted to work. And we put into place an ecosystem around that individual, working with that was work that didn't come from human resources, but rather it came from the individual. And that has ensured that the needs of that individual on the daily basis are managed, are addressed. And suddenly what we see is that there's a higher level of motivation for the other employees. They go beyond their normal responsibilities when they know that they're also responsible for someone else. And this really increased the sense of belonging to the company. It increased the performance of the teams and the motivation of the teams. So it is elements such as this that we put into place. We share best practices within our network in order to support other companies that wish to do the same.
I think I hear that mantra about everybody winning a balloon coming through there. If I could turn now to Danielle. Danielle, in your day job, you're actively encouraging collaboration between big enterprises and government on this theme of treating people with disabilities fairly so that they can contribute to economic growth and so on. Could you tell us a bit about your work? How do business leaders respond when you first approach them about this?
Gracias por la pregunta.
Thank you for the question. Basically, the role played by the National Service for Disabilities is really a technical reference point in the government. However, clearly there are three clear pillars that we have: the private sector, we have the social sector organizations, they're very important, and also the public sector. Now, why are the social sector organizations so important? Well, in Chile we have a law, and the law says that all laws that affect the quality of life of individuals with a disability have to be include a consultation with civil society organizations. We have numerous different legal frameworks, but I'm going to summarize with three. First, the law of equal opportunity, and that law is known in the United States as the Accessibility Act. And then the law of labor inclusion. That's a public policy that addresses affirmative action to incentivize certain cultural changes. And then we have a law that addresses the culture. Now, in practice, and I agree very much with what we've just heard, that this is an obligation, and it's been very important to have these legal frameworks. But together with the laws and the obligations, there also has to be access to best practices. There are numerous organizations that have umbrella organizations. CO for Inclusion, for example, that's where we see the greatest amount of CEOs and directors that generate inclusion policies through best practices. They're also the Global Compact, which brings together companies. There's a network of inclusive companies as well that existed before the laws were put into place, and that was a law from 2010. So why do I underscore this? It's important that companies be able to get together, and I am referring to those that are going beyond the quota, which is 1%. And we need to ensure that they help other companies that are not complying with the law to do so with their best practices. For example, there's also the matter of those not working, those of older than 18 years of age that are not seeking work and they do not want to work. Now, as regards persons with disabilities, that is over 50%. So we can have laws, but if we have a high percentage of individuals, of persons with disabilities that are still not seeking work, well, what that means is that we need to continue to work with social sector organizations to change the culture. And that cultural change involves empowering persons with disabilities. Reasonable accommodations can help, technical assistance can help, and technology as well. This can help them to know that they can enter the workforce. Now, two very concrete examples. There is a roundtable that's working with the Higher Education Secretariat, and we are seeing the professional arcs of those moving from high school to college, and then we want to look at where they go afterwards. We are seeing that the law is not really a matter of showing how many contracts are signed, but rather the challenge now is to ensure that persons with disabilities remain in their jobs, in the workforce. Also, in all jobs, decision-making jobs as well. We, in our service for persons with disabilities, after numerous years, we have directors, men and women alike, regional directors. We have a deaf lawyer, persons with physical disabilities. And this was important because in our country, as well as in others, this didn't happen before. Another cultural change is that we, for many years, were discussing with the judiciary these matters because there was a law from 2015 that did not allow deaf persons studying law to enter the position of being judges. But now with reasonable accommodations, we can say that in Chile we have a first blind judge. And so what we need to do is to bring about changes and to do so that allows for individuals with persons with disabilities to have a wide range of positions with technologies that help inclusion and other systems that allow for them to be autonomous and independent in the workplace. Thank you.
I think your point about enabling people with disabilities to retain their jobs and develop their careers, not just about getting any job, is really important. You did tell us, as we were preparing for today, about a story regarding how you've encouraged a mining operation to actually move into positive action. And I think it's safe to say many in the room wouldn't expect the mining sector to be a close ally of yours. That's a stereotype, I know. Please tell us how that happened.
Sí, me acuerdo cuando preparamos.
I remember that when we were when I was telling you that, yes, it's a clear example of how we can knock down stereotypes. When we began to enact the law of labor inclusion, there are two significant obstacles. First, an article from the former labor code, Article 16. It did not allow for the contracting of persons with intellectual or sensorial disabilities or that they were allowed to be hired at less than minimum wage. And that was overturned. That was an important change because we went from thinking that this wasn't, we went from thinking that this is a favor to thinking that it's a right. And then cultural stereotypes. I remember that we began to speak with the large-scale mining companies in Chile. We have copper mines, large copper mines, and someone told me it's impossible for a person with a disability to work in mining, and in particular, in certain areas of the mining process. Today, we have a large-scale truck driver, a woman working in mining. And this was possible because there were changes in the normative frameworks with laws that bring visibility to the rights of persons with disabilities. And then, secondly, companies need to be willing and to dare to offer reasonable accommodations. Those are investments, not just in the person with disabilities. They're investments in all of those that are working in the company. And then third, and this is very important, whenever we talk about reasonable accommodations, we have to also address the matter of technologies. This means that when there's technological innovation, we are also innovating in the production chains and how the products are getting to the internal and external clients. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think when we talk about stereotypes, it's always good to hear the stories that challenge stereotypes about both people with disabilities and the private sector. If I could now turn to our representative from the private sector, in addition to patients today. And so, Joanna Neto, Sodexo has 430,000 employees, which is amazing. Given we know about 25% of that population will have a disability and or health condition, just very interested in how do you ensure that Sodexo delivers consistent and fair and sensible treatment of its people?
Thank you, Susan. I think it's important to look at this from different perspectives. Like you said, Sodexo is a very large company. 430,000 employees is a lot to manage, and that's across various countries. And what we have, obviously, is in our code of conduct, we have our commitment globally to what we are committed to in terms of people with disabilities and providing the environment that is needed and accommodations. So being committed to attracting talent and enabling everyone to reach their full potential and having initiatives that support that, and the inclusion of people with disabilities and providing reasonable accommodations. This is the global statement. But then when we operate in countries, over 45 countries, and in many cases on client sites, we're a service provider, so the majority of our employees actually work on our client sites. And what we have then is localized processes and policies to allow employees to receive accommodations and to get the support they need, and providing that equity. But if I look at it from the perspective of a large organization, there is obviously a lot of challenges. We need to look at it from the point of view of continuous improvement. So we have policies, we have processes, we're committed to doing this, but we also have the challenge of working with such a wide and diverse range of people, from different small communities to countries where it's not necessarily safe to say you have a disability. So I would say a lot of our challenge is really actually getting our employees to identify as having a disability and to trust the organization to provide what is needed, and not to actually slow their career progression and tell them or let them know that they have the opportunity that everybody else does. And so providing the accommodations is not the biggest challenge, I would say. It is often really knowing your employees. And so the biggest piece of work that I like to look at is how are we providing that environment, that culture of trust that allows our employees to ask for the accommodation, and then doing the training, the awareness, and providing the resources to our leaders, to our supervisors, our managers, our directors at all levels of people management to be able to respond well and to know the policies that exist in terms of providing that accommodation. The other element, of course, is being on a client site, so partnering with our clients to ensure that if our employees need an accommodation on their site, that they're able to receive that. And then from the other perspective is because we are often the person that the client side will come to ask for something because we're managing the services or the facilities, to be aware and to be trained on how to respond to those employees, ensuring that it's not just our employees that get treated fairly, that get the accommodations they need, and don't feel unwelcomed in asking for those accommodations that are often very difficult to ask for. And so it's a lot of collaboration, and I would say a lot of constant improvement.
And, of course, the complexity of operating in 45 different jurisdictions where the legislation will differ. The definition of who qualifies technically in law as having a disability differs. So, of course, what we're encouraging is global corporates having their own standards of performance here that lifts them above mere legal compliance in any jurisdiction. But I wanted to come back to you because actually, when you're operating in 45 different jurisdictions, we know that the local government policy and public policy environment will have a big impact. What do you think the various states could do as, having ratified the CRPD, that would make it easier for the well-intentioned employer to get this right?
If I look at it from Sodexo's side, we are in, like you said, 45 different countries, but some of those are very large countries where there's a lot of resources, and some of those are very small countries. And so the level of support, the level of awareness at the country level is very different across the board. And then if I, consider other private organizations that maybe are smaller or have less resources or in very small countries, then, if the support that could be provided beyond just awareness from, what is the legislation and how does it work and what are the policies, is, providing support for those reasonable accommodations that are more costly. Not every organization can support that level of investment in accommodations, and it's very challenging then to say, as an organization, we're 100% committed to doing this. We will provide the accommodations necessary to everybody and providing that equity and that inclusion when the costs can be quite difficult and quite insurmountable for some organizations. So might still fall under reasonable, but might be a large investment for that organization. So I think those local entities can really provide some programs, some support in order to to facilitate the process of accommodation in those particular cases. But I think also as partnering with the private sector to provide the support and to help bring different organizations together to work together. I think my experience with the disability community has been that it is a very inclusive community trying to work together to improve things for everyone. And I think it would be very helpful if the local governments, local lawmakers, policymakers took on that same approach.
Thank you. Well, there's two things there for me. Most adjustments, of course, are not expensive, but when they are, for example, sign language interpreters can be, if you're a senior manager, you need it every day because you're involved in meetings and communication constantly. The UK government's programme Access to Work has acknowledged that it's in the interests of the UK government to ensure that people who need sign language interpreters so that they can work, they're precisely the individuals that actually would be most likely to be long-term unemployed unless the cost of those interpreters was joint funded between government and the employer. And so the expensive adjustments, which often with the smaller companies are unreasonable, when they're picked up, if you like, in a partnership mode with government can make a huge difference. But I think also the question of how we ensure that we are listening to people with disabilities on the ground everywhere, learning directly from their experience, what happens when they actually do ask for an adjustment, what can they reasonably expect from their employer is really important. And so our next panelist, Rina Prasarani, say that again? Prasarani is, I've asked her to come at this stage, actually, in our conversation, because ultimately everything we're talking about in terms of how governments and the private sector understand and adapt for people with disabilities depends on learning directly from people with disabilities. And so I'm asking Rina to have the last word here, if you like, before we go into conversation. Rina, your voice being so important, what have you learned in terms of how, from your personal experience, you can expect from an employer, your experience with the kind of employers who have actually made it possible for you to achieve so much?
All right. Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure to be here. And I would say that based on my experience, there are a lot of modification and appropriate adjustment that been made since I was coming to the company. Because at the recruitment process also, they make adjustments. So it's all about adjustment. It's all about modification. It's all about appropriate things to do. It's all about changing the system in accordance to what the employees need. And since I'm a person with disabilities, there are a lot of adjustment. But when it is viewed as something that ensure that everybody going to be on board, and so that a system can be viewed as an investment rather than a cost, And I really hope that this kind of changing also viewed as something that we can, be done collaborative by different sectors like the company, the government, and also the organization of persons with disabilities, because I believe that the expert of the disability itself is only can be searched or being get from the person with disabilities itself. And what is the company that I'm working on, which is the Grand Melia Hotel, was viewing me not as a burden, but as an asset of the company, of the business. So I work with others with like simple adjustment. I'm using the screen reader like other used to do, like the other blind person used to work with the computer. And now we have open spaces for the screen reader, which makes screen reader is affordable for most company who is going to employ person with visual disability. Long time ago, there is only expensive screen reader, which is for most company they feel it like a burden. But now, since the company like that make open sources for the screen reader, they make it available for anyone, even the individual or the company, to make their computer or laptop accessible to person with disabilities. So this kind of thing that my company do. And also since I joined the company, a lot of culture that's been changing. Like, for example, people are more sensitive. People are more can face or they just realize that we all are in diverse situation. For example, some of them can see, but me cannot see. But at the same time, we work on the same company, and when the company also trusts me to be the trainer of some program there. For example, teaching the basic Braille. It is also something that they will never get in other company. Or, for example, the training on how to assist person with visual impairment. It can also benefit the company and also the employee as the whole. So that is what my company do for me, since I was there to make sure that I'm on board and also can work like others on an equal basis.
Thank you very much. I think there may well be people here who work on gender equality and gender rights routinely. And just to remind us that women and girls with disabilities actually have a particularly tough row to hoe in many instances. And so looking at your programs in such a way that it's not just about some women, it's about all women becomes really important. And so on that theme, Rina, I'm told that you've had considerable support and flexibility from your employer in your role as a single mother with 2 sons. Can you give us some practical examples of what that means?
Yeah. So basically, I work like others, like 5 days a week, 2 days off in a week. But the flexibility is that I can choose which day I want to have the day off. So, for example, if I have something going on Tuesday, then I can. So the schedule starts from Monday to Sunday. So if I have something on Tuesday that I have to go to my son's school, or I have to take my son to his therapy, or even to do program in the disabled people organization, I can choose whether I want to have the off days in that week on Tuesday and Thursday, or Tuesday and Wednesday, as long as it is in that week, and also as long as then I don't work further than 5 days in a row. So if it's like 6 days, then they will remind me that, hey, you have to have that day off on the 6th day, because it is not allowed by the company for their employee to work more than 5 days in a row. Right. Yeah, and if I working on the public holiday, I will get 2 extra off. And apart from that, I also have annual leave from 12 days, and then it will be increasing the next year and then the next year. So there are a lot of off days that I can use on my flexibility, and also I'm always working on the afternoon shift, which is from 3 to 12 midnight. So in the morning I can do the domestic work, I can take care of my children, and then after that I go to the disabled people organization, and after that I go to the work at 3 p.m.
So you're just carrying 3 full-time jobs, as I hear that. All right. But I do think for me that highlights the fact that actually the flexibility we're talking about, while yes, it's a legal obligation for people with disabilities, if it's reasonable and so on, actually benefits so many, because so many people now are in caring roles. I think 1 in 8 of the workforce in the UK is either caring for an older parent, caring for a disabled child. This kind of flexibility makes such a difference. We had an instance with a major insurance company in the UK where they had a well-admired and established employee who started turning up late every day. And it turned out she was caring for an elderly parent and had to change the sheets in the laundry every morning, but she didn't have a washing machine. So their idea of a reasonable adjustment was they gave her a washing machine. And then she was on time every day from there on. I don't know if that's a legal obligation or just common sense and good business practice. Thank you very much, panel. Before we go into a further conversation, I want to invite Mr. Erik Lundberg, the Deputy Director of the Political Department of Finland, to make a contribution, as I know he's keen to do so. So, Mr. Lundberg.
Madam Scott Parker, esteemed panelists, I'd like to thank the working group, the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the ILO Global Business and Disability Network, the Disability Rights Fund, and the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities for organizing this panel discussion and for continuing to keep the rights of persons with disabilities high on the forum agenda. When it comes to reasonable accommodation, in Finland, authorities, education providers, employers, and providers of goods and services must provide reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities as needed. Denial of reasonable accommodation constitutes discrimination under the Finnish law, and the needs of the persons with disabilities are the primary basis for assessing reasonable accommodation. Persons with disabilities are an incredibly diverse group of people, as we've heard from the panelists here today. And they account for 1 in 6 adults worldwide. That's over 1 billion people. We need to consider far more carefully how we can be more inclusive for persons with disabilities in the workplace and the business activities. This is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. We cannot afford to overlook the potential of 1 billion people. Persons with disabilities and their representative organizations must be directly involved in discussions about reasonable accommodation. They are the best experts on what they need, as we've also heard from the panel. Ideally, workplaces, processes, and services are designed to be inclusive and accommodate diverse needs from the start, thus mitigating the need for reasonable accommodation afterwards. Increasing knowledge and understanding about business and human rights is critical, and we are investing in training. I'm very proud to share that our training on business and human rights, developed for Finnish government staff, is now free for anyone to take. The course is, as I said, free of charge, and it is in English. And it introduces the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. It lays down what a government official can do to support companies in fulfilling their responsibility to respect human rights. The course includes a module focusing on non-discrimination with a special focus on the right of persons with disabilities. To conclude, I want to note that promoting the realization of the rights of persons with disabilities is an integral part of Finland's foreign policy. Disability inclusion has long been a priority in our human rights policy, a cross-cutting objective in our development cooperation and humanitarian assistance, and increasingly also in our trade policy. Last year, we presented our groundbreaking research paper on inclusive trade and persons with disabilities that also takes into account the need for reasonable accommodations. We are happy to inform you that this work has paid off, as the key Geneva-based organizations in this field, UNCTAD, WTO, ITC, and ILO, established an interagency technical working group on trade and disability to enhance the work on disability inclusion in international trade. If I may finish off with a question, we've already heard some good examples on how government and companies and disability organizations can work together in advancing a reasonable accommodation. But I think what we really need is to focus on practical models. So if there are any more insights on practical examples, I would be very keen to hear them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindberg. Certainly Finland's commitment to disability inclusive development is long-standing, so thank you for that contribution. And in terms of both practical and aligned with the kind of training that you're now making available and which we will certainly promote, just a reference with the ILO's Global Business and Disability Network have, of course, made available a free self-assessment tool for use by any and every employer worldwide, including the public sector as employers, I would say. Because while we talk about business and their importance as employers, the public sector in many countries, particularly in the Global South, is a hugely influential employer in its own right. And so the self-assessment tool, Jürgen Menze is with us today. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to tell you in more detail about it, but it's aligned directly with the principles that shape the CRPD, enabling business to understand how in practical terms you can deliver best practice that aligns with the human rights agenda. And so I would just commend that to everyone. But your question about practical models, I like practical. So who's going to talk about practical models? I'd like to start actually with you, Danielle, I think, because you are working with both business and with the disability sector in Chile. Can you give us an example of a practical model that everyone in the room could go back and promote?
Thank you for that question. I think that many of the panelists here have good examples to provide too. From the Chilean point of view, I think I could speak about a model which I think has been quite interesting, and it goes back a long way. It is the establishment of the inclusive company network that goes back to the 90s. It has made it possible for different groups of companies from the group of companies known as Fabril. It has worked on subjects that are important within companies from the viewpoint of inclusive policies for some time, and others may know more about this than I do. It was very fashionable to use the practice of striving to improve the company's image. But what is now being asked of companies is that they join this network of inclusive companies. REIN is the acronym REIN. And the companies are forced to place at the heart of their activities the idea of being a company with inclusive policies. For example, we speak about Sodexo here, and that is from the viewpoint of human resources. It's important to talk about going to the very core of the company's work to try to plan this from a gender perspective. It's cross-cutting. It's not just a question of looking at profiles and trying to hire more people with disabilities, but it's also a question of companies asking themselves, how can I change my production chain activities and my client services so that they are more inclusive? For example, how can a company deal with a customer, above all a financial service company, which has accessible business financial policies? And to go to practical examples, we are working with some banks because what's happened is that the machines have been changed for payments. And there was a keyboard used before. And for blind people, this was very difficult. It's important for them to have Braille possibilities. So when a new machine is installed, which only works on the basis of touch, it's impossible for a person with a visual impairment to know which numbers are on the screen with the touch system in place. So what we have been working on, this is the National Disability Service together with banks and organizations of the blind. We're trying to see how we can have access to and generate an accessory, a machine that allows blind people to follow what's happening and to have an accessible system so that they can pay on an independent, autonomous basis. This is important. We're talking about examples with the old machines. Now technology has developed, and some people were excluded with this touch system. So when this happens, you have to go back to working together on the issue. It's important that this is an ongoing process. It never stops. No one can say that because I've done this or that, I'm an inclusive company. No. All we can say is that we always have to be trying to learn more, and other major challenges, and here I'm going to stop, which are very important, involve how can we work with persons who are autistic or who have other mental disabilities. They require different types of accommodations. Sometimes rooms that are soundproofed, and also rooms that allow them to concentrate because of the different color schemes used. This is important to take into account so that these people can also provide a lot to work and labor systems. Another major example I'm thinking of is in our network. I would say that this has helped us to keep up to the minute in our companies, and we're always discussing things with social networks and the National Service of Disabilities and the Labour Office as to technical tools so that we can go beyond what is just required by the law and to try to hire more people with disabilities. Thank you.
I'm conscious of the time and that perhaps we have a few minutes now to take questions from the floor. So could I ask people to put up their hands if they are the panel? Jürgen?
Good morning, and thank you for this important panel. My name is Jürgen Menz. I'm the coordinator of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network, and I just wanted to make a comment and then also a question to the panelists. First, thank you for the question about practical guides. I just want to add that the ILO has a practical guide on how to provide reasonable accommodations at the workplace. If you want to, just reading out the title, so you find it easily on Google, Promoting Diversity and Inclusion Through Workplace Adjustments, a practical guide. It's not only described how you should do it, it's also a range of practical examples, what reasonable accommodation means in practice. Now, I think when we work in the global business and disability networks with multinational enterprises, Sodexo is one of our members, but also national business and disability networks, the Senegal network just joined, we see that sometimes beyond the ethical case and the human rights case of employing people with disabilities, there's of course sometimes the concern, yeah, but how much does it cost? I mean, this is a question we still need to ask. And well, I think it's sometimes a bit of a narrow view, I must say, right? Because we don't necessarily ask this question about other groups when we talk about labor market inclusion. But I just want to think about, and Rina also said it well, look, it doesn't always involve a financial cost. We know that most reasonable accommodations actually do not involve a financial cost. I just want to stress this. And so a question to the panelists: when you get these questions about financial costs, what is your answers to employers who might just start the disability inclusion journey? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll take a few questions before I turn to the panel. What, in addition to how much does it cost? No one asks what it costs to hire Canadians, but there we go.
There's one straight behind Jürgen at the back.
Behind Jürgen at the back, and then this gentleman here in the purple, and this person here. Please? Okay. Can I have your question? Yes, over here. straight ahead of me.
Bonjour et merci.
Good morning and thank you. First off, what has drawn my attention, and I'm not sure whether it's an issue of translation or whether this is the word that's used, but it's when we say person handicapé in French, handicapé, I would prefer that we use person with a handicap, handicapé with a disability. That way we're focusing more on, we're not reinforcing the stereotype of the individual. Now, secondly, the issue of reasonable accommodations is very important. And I think this is in our head a lot because the issue of financing, it's really when there's a will, there's a way. What we need to do is focus on awareness raising of the employers, among others. When they want to, we want to make sure that when they put forth, when these ideas are put forth, it doesn't become a member of financing developing countries, such as Tunisia. We have done a lot of work, particularly as regards women. One of the speakers spoke of health care at home, child care. It's the same stereotype that we see, particularly when we talk about women. So I think that this issue really involves a revolution of the mind and in the way we think. Thank you.
You, please.
Thank you very much. أنا فقط لأفهم هذا التخوف من الذكاء الاصطناعي.
Thank you. Truly, I do not understand the fears regarding artificial intelligence, and in particular as regards the loss of potential jobs, and especially among those suffering, or rather those with disabilities. This is a need that requires adaptation. We must adapt to these new tools, and it's certainly possible for human beings to find solutions. Solutions can be found, whether it's about regular job positions or whether it's about jobs specifically created for persons with disabilities. The idea is to go beyond the fears, the difficulties, particularly as regards persons with disabilities. I thank you kindly.
Muchas gracias. Excelente.
Thank you very much. Excellent comments. I should like to ask a specific question of Danielle Conchamboa, specifically the process of choosing the first blind judge in Chile. Perhaps you could let us know more about the changes that were made in the Judicial Academy that allowed for this to happen. Thank you.
That sounds like a very practical question. Thank you. One more before I turn to the panel, please. Any more questions? Yes, over here on my left.
Hello, thank you for the great panel discussion. So my name is Akiko from Japan, and I'm an attorney at law and focusing on the human rights of persons with particularly psychosocial disabilities. So my question is about, when the reasonable accommodation is not provided or not agreed by both parties, I think their access to remedy for the person with disability is also important from business and human rights perspective. So my question is that, what's your experience of ensuring the access to remedy for those they're seeking for the reasonable accommodation, but there at some point there are employers that do not provide that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think access to remedy is a universal issue, not just in Japan. So if I can then just turn to my panel, I want to start with Jürgen's question, which I'm sure is shared widely, which is, can we argue that how much does it cost? How important is this objection that we frequently encounter? And I wonder who in my panel is best placed to answer that. Patience would like to come in on that, and then perhaps I can turn to Sodexo. Patience.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I'm going to respond while responding also to the woman from Tunisia. Yeah, exactly. The issue of companies and they do look at what this costs, because when we look at this in terms of the financial burden, they do look at, when we look at this as a burden, they look at what this is going to cost. But when we look at raising awareness with companies, we try to look at get them to look at this as an investment. That's language that they understand. These top management or the CEOs, they understand that the concept of an investment that fosters the performance of the company. If we've done the work inside a company to have people working in specific posts, it wouldn't make sense to fail to underscore the need for these persons with disabilities to have the tools they need to benefit the company. So we really need to support them in this manner. We need to raise awareness and help them to change their mindset, the employers and the company, in order to not have them look at reasonable accommodations as financial burdens, but rather as investments. The idea is to get everyone on board so they can give the best of themselves and so that they can do the best for the global performance of the company. So yes, there is a cost, but it's the perception that we give of that cost that must change. If we bring a paradigmatic shift here, and it looks like, and it is seen as an investment instead of a financial burden, well, then that makes sense. That's what we're working on in Senegal within our network. We do so in order to help companies understand that they need to give everyone in their company, all employees, the possibility of giving the best of themselves for the betterment of the performance of the company. Thank you.
They've had a systematic approach to making adjustments or accommodations for the last 10 years. They don't ask, does it cost too much anymore? Because they see it as investing in enhancing everyone's productivity, engagement, and of course cutting the cost of replacing people. Never mind mitigating the legal risks, because in some jurisdictions there are significant legal risks as well. Sodexo, how do you handle this? Is the cost an issue?
Well, I think what happens often is that there's an assumption. The word accommodation somehow in many people's mind flashes up dollar signs. And there's this huge assumption that there's a large cost to it. And like you said earlier, Susan, many accommodations don't have a cost. Being flexible on hours of work, those types of things don't have a cost. It's a lot of awareness work that has to be done in the organization to, like you said, share with our leaders at all levels that accommodations are about increasing productivity. They're about increasing engagement. They're about providing that inclusive environment that allows you to grow and prosper as an organization. I read something quickly this morning, and I don't have the, it's not a direct quote, but there was this article about how I think 2.5 billion people are expected to have developed or have hearing loss issues over the coming years, and that could require an investment of approximately $1.40 or €1.40. It was something like that. But the return on that investment was so much larger. It was in the millions. So the education piece is really important on the return on investment. We had the opportunity in Canada, in our business in Canada, to do a bit of a study with some professors at a local university that were actually taking all the information we had in a particular site and looking at the attendance, looking at the performance, all different elements of the employees, and for the ones with disabilities as well, looking at those differences. They turned it into a formula, and they were able to show a number of how hiring people with disabilities was not more expensive. It was actually more of a benefit, and it had better retention, better engagement opportunities. And being able to do that, if we could do that everywhere, we would be demonstrating very clearly that it does not cost more. It is, in fact, a huge benefit to the organization.
Though I must add, I've never found statistics to change behavior. and that it's when people with disabilities start talking to the senior executives and they get to know and consult their own people that you get the real change. But I don't want to forget this question about having redress in law from our colleague in Japan. I wonder, Yarnia, could I ask you to come in there? Do you find that in most countries that you're scrutinizing, if you like, people with disabilities know they have rights in law, they know what their rights are, and they do have redress?
Well, we are mostly working in European countries where there are national frameworks that kind of provides for these effective monitoring mechanisms and as well as remedies. And states are the ones who are responsible to kind of establish these national clear legal frameworks to allow this. And as for the knowledge of persons with disabilities, a lot depends also on the representative organizations of persons with disabilities who are, at least in the countries that we focused on, very strong, doing a lot of awareness raising, which is also actually also our role as national human rights institutions, and we try to kind of contribute to this knowledge and also to monitor and advocate and oversee the state authorities in providing these effective remedies.
Thank you. I do hope that we're going to see more communication to people with disabilities in the general population about their rights. I just think we've been a bit slow in actually getting that message across. I want to come back, before we finish, to the question about artificial intelligence and take the liberty of coming back on that myself, if you like, in that, yes, I am optimistic that we'll find some solutions. But at the moment, artificial intelligence-powered HR technology is building in discrimination, partly because of the bias in the data, and it's always disability biased at this point, and partly because it is inflexible. We see the HR technology developers saying, we treat everyone exactly the same. We've standardized the process to remove bias. But actually, of course, exactly what we've been talking about today, rigid systems are inherently discriminatory when you need to make adjustments or accommodations for individuals who need flexibility in the system. So I'd be happy to chat afterwards with anyone who would like to explore that in more detail. We have a website, disabilityethicalai.org, one word, disabilityethicalai.org, that spells out that in some detail. Now, am I right that I have 5 minutes before we finish? And so I think my final question then would be, if we had one message, don't you love this panel? You've got one message that you want everyone in this room to take away after this really important opportunity. We must be grateful to the Business and Human Rights Organization for putting this so firmly on the agenda. But if we had one thing to say about how to bring the rights of persons with disabilities clearly into this debate, this global debate on human rights, what would it be? Can I start with, well, you. Start with you, sir.
First, we can speak later, and I can tell you more about the process. But thinking about the process now, listen, you asked about how what was done to allow for the first blind judge. I have to say that there is a balance between being pretty harsh on making sure that laws protecting and recognizing the rights of persons with disabilities are enforced, but also raise awareness. We all know that law is blind, and so how could we say, how is law blind, and then say that there's a regulation from 2015 that prevents the blind with brilliant legal careers from becoming judges, men and women alike. And if you look at this, we do need to have a balance between the exigencies of the law is the law, it's a duty, but then also a sense of humor a bit, and to see where things can change and places where we can raise awareness. So lastly, an example. I was speaking of people that are blind. I'm losing my hair. I'm a small person. I should have described myself. I have a tie. I think it's important for all of us to be able to help others. And help others to overcome barriers and to allow for persons with disabilities so that we can have more persons with disabilities working in different areas, whether it's in the public or private sectors. Thank you.
That sounds like a longer story than we have time for, Daniel. If I could turn to Patience, please. Your last message.
Merci, Suzanne.
Thank you, Susan. My last message would be that of continuing to build bridges in private and public sectors and between and among different organizations representing persons with disabilities. So bridges between companies and persons with disabilities, etc. The more bridges we build, the more we will speaking the same language, the more easy it will be for us to understand each other and to respect the rights of each and everyone. Thank you.
And Rena, what would your message be?
I would like to emphasize again, I would like to emphasize again that the reasonable accommodation for persons with disabilities in the workplace is not a burden. It is really an investment. And it is really true that most of the time, reasonable accommodation, just right, because reasonable accommodation most of the time doesn't cost anything. What makes it cost sometimes, it's about the accessibility is not there before. That's why make it expensive. And we need to bear in mind that accessibility has to be there whether or not there is a person with disabilities in your company, whether a person with disabilities in your school, in your place, in public transportation. When it is not accessible, then when people with disabilities come, and then with all the reasonable accommodation makes it costly too. And when we talk about investment, it's not about the company itself. It's also for the governments, because when the reasonable accommodation is really have a cost, we have to think that it is in an embedded cost. It is something that inside the reasonable accommodation. So last for me is that I would like to say that the disability happens, but what makes them disabled is the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess we could say the word reasonable over and over to ourselves. It is supposed to be reasonable.
Yeah.
And so, Joanne.
Thank you. I think what I would like to say is beyond where everybody is at with accommodations now, what I would like to get across is that often we have a fear to look at where we are at in order to see how we can be more accessible, how we can provide accommodations. And I would encourage everybody to set that fear aside and take an honest look at where your organization is, whether it's private or public. Do that work and then just take one step at a time in order to get to where you need to be, and not fear the journey, but just take that initial step to really work towards full inclusion of people with disabilities.
Thank you. And certainly asking your people what happens when people ask for an adjustment is a very powerful first step. Yarineya.
Thank you. I think it's important to finish with emphasizing that it's crucial that persons with disabilities are meaningfully involved in all decisions affecting their lives and ensuring that their life experience shape inclusive policies and practices.
Thank you. And I suppose my final word would be, it's absolutely crucial that we start to tell the world that disability is a human rights imperative. I feel often when we're talking about employers in the private sector, we underestimate the fact that the society around them has yet to get the message. And that's why it was such a pleasure to be invited to join you today, to see such a prestigious organization raising awareness that disability is a fundamental human rights-related issue in the context of all our conversations with the private sector, and I would say again, and with the public sector as employers and service providers. Thank you very much for your attention today, and thank you to my panel. Thank you.